25.11 is centered around some pretty big champion changes, with Samira and Garen both getting adjustments that could shift their meta builds, while Ryze is being given a ton of damage to his early game skirmish. So we'll have the full breakdown and analysis of every single change and provide you guys with an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. And let's be honest, picking the best champions is fun, but is that really enough on its own? I don't know about you, but locking in Jinx just because she's OP tier doesn't really help if you're lacking sufficient knowledge as an ADC. However, you can begin stomping your way out of low elo when using our brand new Bronze to Diamond course that goes hard in teaching you everything you need to know to succeed as an ADC, which will have you speedrunning any game below Diamond using the tactics our multi-role challenger player Hector has used to climb to the apex of the ranked ladder. And that's just for ADC. Your mid lane OP tier Xerath pick becomes actually unstoppable when you know all the essentials of mid lane thanks to the new 6-part mid lane series over on our platform that our top 10 challenger player Strompist has tirelessly worked on, exclusive to our members. Our tier list gets you the right champions, SkillCapped gets you the right skills. And we're so confident it works, if you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using the platform, you literally don't pay a cent. So why hold yourself back this season and finally get the rank you deserve? And with that being said, let's get into it. So we have just one item being adjusted for 25.11, and it's Horizon Focus. The item landed in a weaker spot than Riot had hoped after its 25.10 adjustments, so they are reducing the cost of the item by 100 gold and giving it an additional 5 AP. What's really interesting here, and something to keep an eye on for 25.11, is the fact that Xerath heavily benefited from this, but he was already one of the highest win rate mids in 25.10. So this could very well be a buff that pushes Xerath over the top and turns him into the highest priority mage for solo queue. Other champs who can look to benefit from these buffs include Vel'Koz, Ziggs, Ahri, Zoe, Hui, and Lux. With both Rod of Ages and Liandry's nerfed in recent patches, we definitely think that Ahri should be liking her old core of Malignance into Horizon much more for 25.11. Riot overshot with the Cho'Gath buffs from 25.10, so they're pulling back a tad for 25.11. It's Cho's armor growth that's going to be lower, dropping from 5 to 4.5. With Cho'Gath slightly overperforming in 25.10, we don't think this nerf will be enough to push him down the tier list, so he's going to remain in S for now. These Aatrox changes are some of the more interesting of the patch, as he's going to have damage shifted around in his kit. Passive max health damage will be lowered, going from 4 scaling to 12% to 4 scaling to 8%. Q sweet spot damage amp is being increased from 60 to 70%. And then W damage type is being changed from magic to physical. So looking at the comparison clips here, we can see that passive damage drops off by 18 on your one item spike. As for Q, if you're able to hit every single sweet spot of all 3 Qs, it equates to an increase in damage of 43. We can see that with just one sweet spot Q landing, it's an increase in 10 damage. So in order for this to be a net buff, you will have to land at least 2 sweet spot Qs in a skirmish. So it's really all going to come down to the situation as to whether these changes land as a buff or a nerf. If you can't hit your sweet spot damage with Q, then it's a damage nerf, but if you are a skilled Aatrox player and can consistently land them, it'll be a buff. Fact is though, even if you are the most skilled Aatrox player, you're not going to land every single sweet spot, so the adjustments probably end up rather neutral or a slight nerf in the grand scheme of things. So for now, we aren't going to be moving Aatrox down the top lane tier list, but there's a chance we may have to drop him to A for the mid-patch tier list if the adjustments do land more negatively than we think they could. Garen is the second top lane champ who's receiving some massive changes that will be shifting power around in his kit. E cooldown is dropping from 9 at all ranks to 9 scaling to 6 seconds. The base damage per spin of 0 scaling to 8.2 will be completely removed from the spell. However, the AD ratio is going up from 36 scaling to 40% to 36 scaling to 44%. E crit modifier is dropping from 1.5 to 1.4. With E fully maxed out on Garen, looking at the comparison clips, we can see that it's only a 2 damage decrease from 25.10 to 25.11. So the fact that the cooldown on E is now at 6 seconds instead of 9 when you have it maxed, it's looking like these E changes should land as net buffs for Garen, at least on his one item spike. 2 items is where it would be more of a significant hit to his damage if building Phantom Dancer due to the crit modifier being reduced. It will be interesting to see if Phantom Dancer remains the most optimal second item on Garen, because building Bruiser does gain in relative power due to these changes. The W changes are looking like net nerfs though, with cooldown dropping from 23 scaling to 15 seconds to 22 scaling to 12 seconds. W damage reduction is changed from 30% at all ranks to 25 scaling to 41%. The big nerf here though is the fact that you will no longer gain 10% bonus armor and magic resist at max stacks of W. Now you might be thinking, well, if the damage reduction is up from 30 to 41% at max rank, won't that just outweigh the loss in armor and magic resist? Well, you have to consider that you don't max your W out until last on Garen, and will have just 1 point in the spell up until level 14 when you allocate your second point. So level 13 and prior, this is just a flat out nerf to Garen's W. At level 18, when you have the spell fully maxed, it could possibly turn into a buff, but overall, we see these W changes landing net negatively due to the fact that you will always be weaker for a good chunk of early to mid game, while you're never even guaranteed to reach the later stages, where you could benefit from the added damage reduction at max rank. And then for one more change, we have Garen's R losing some damage at the later ranks, going from 150 scaling to 450 to 150 scaling to 350. So overall, it's kind of a tough call to whether Garen gains or loses win rate from these adjustments. From looking at the E changes, it seems like they will be buffs, but the W changes should land as nerfs. So you will have more offensive output, but your durability drops off for the early to mid game. For now, we will be leaving Garen in the top lane A tier, as we're thinking it's more of a power neutral shift here, but we definitely wouldn't be surprised if he does lose some win rate. So moving on to the top lane tier list now, one champion who's more commonly played as a mid laner, but who we think should see a nice boost for top lane in 25.11 is Ryze. We'll go into detail on the Ryze changes when covering mid lane, but basically his EQ combo is getting a bunch of extra damage added in the early game. The reason we think top lane Ryze should be able to take advantage of this better than mid lane is due to the fact that most of Ryze's top lane matchups will be against melee fighters, who he will be more consistently able to poke out in lane. If you're playing mid lane Ryze and going up against longer range mages, then you're just not going to be able to land EQ combos as consistently in lane to fully take advantage of the buff. So top lane Ryze is getting a push from A into S tier for 25.11. Other than that, the tier list is going to look exactly the same as to where we had it last patch, with Set, Shen, and Kayle continuing to excel above everyone else. Moving on to jungle now, Diana is going to see a nice boost to her clear speed, with passive monster damage amp going up from 225 to 260%. So the fact that Diana can proc her passive every 3 auto attacks, this will definitely add up over the course of a full clear. We had moved Diana down the jungle tier list last patch as she was negatively impacted by the Liandry's nerf, but with this buff coming through for 25.11, she'll be moving right back up into the jungle A tier. We have a buff to Rengar on the way, as his R cooldown is being reduced by 10 seconds at all ranks. Rengar is always a more difficult champion for us to rank on our tier list because it's night and day how impactful the champion is based on the elo. For instance, right now in silver and gold elo, Rengar literally has an abysmal 44% win rate. If we make our way up to Masters elo though, he's actually been performing exceptionally well lately, up above 52%. So this is one of those times where it would be nice to have a high elo and low elo specific tier list, because we're never going to please everyone with where we place Rengar on our tier list. Since we do try to cater our tier list towards what's best for Diamond and below, which makes up 99% of the player base, we do tend to rate Rengar a bit lower than where you may see high elo players rate him. So with that being said, for now, we will be leaving Rengar in the jungle B tier, as even with the buff, we don't see him being all that more powerful for the average player. A second jungler who was hurt by the Liandry's nerf last patch is getting buffed for 25.11, being Udyr. It's Udyr's R in Phoenix stance that will be buffed, with the damage on your next 2 attacks after using R being increased from 10 scaling to 30 to 10 scaling to 40, and AP ratio on those attacks are going up from 30 to 35%. So not an overly impactful buff to Udyr, and we don't see him gaining enough power to reclaim an S tier spot, so he'll remain in the jungle A tier. Elise was one champ who ended up benefiting a ton from the AP item changes from last patch, so Riot will be directly nerfing her in 25.11. It's her passive on hit damage that is being nerfed, with the AP ratio dropping from 20 to 15%. So a decent chunk of damage removed from Elise's skirmish, as a 5% drop doesn't seem that bad, but when you consider that over the course of an extended fight you are likely to be auto attacking at the very least 2 or 3 times, it's more like a 10 to 15% nerf than just 5%. We had moved Elise up into the jungle S tier last patch, but she's going to be dropping back down into A tier due to this nerf. So looking at the jungle tier list for 25.11, it's going to be a similar theme to last patch. Jarvan is leading the way in the OP tier, and then there are a ton of great S tier junglers to choose from right now. Echo and Evelynn are back in really strong spots due to the AP item changes from 25.10. Fighters like Warwick, Xin Zhao, Volibear, and Briar are all exceptionally strong picks. And then if you want to play a tank right now, there isn't actually a whole lot of variety, and most players wouldn't even really consider Mundo as a true tank, as he's more of a juggernaut. But if you want a more durable jungler to play, then Mundo is the best in class. Other than Elise and Diana being moved around, we're adjusting Vi down into the C tier as the only other tier list change. Vi adjustments from 25.10 ended up landing much more negative than we had originally expected, as her win rate dropped 2.5%, so she's one of the weakest fighter junglers that you can play now. Moving on to mid lane now, these Ryze changes have been stirring up a lot of conversation on social media, so let's take a look at what Riot has in store. Q damage against targets who are tagged with Ryze's E is going up from 10 scaling to 100% to 25 scaling to 100%. W damage is dropping though by 10 at all ranks to compensate. So if you're using a standard combo with Ryze, the net outcome of these changes will be a buff. If you are just simply throwing out W for poke though, then of course it's a nerf. Keep in mind that in an extended skirmish, Ryze can get multiple EQ combos off, so a lot of the time it's actually even greater than a 15% damage boost. So we think the buff should be pretty impactful impactful and are going to be moving Ryze back up the mid lane tier list for 25.11, going from B into A tier. Twisted Fate has been struggling ever since the Rod of Ages nerfs, so he's directly buffed for this patch, with his Q damage being increased by 10 at all ranks. So nothing that's going to impact Twisted Fate's power in a very significant way, so we'll be leaving him in the B tier for now. Annie has been an OP tier mid for the past couple of patches, so she's receiving nerfs for 25.10. Base armor is going up from 19 to 23, however armor growth will be dropping from 4.7 to 4. W damage is being reduced from 7D scaling to 270 to 70 scaling to 250, while the AP ratio is down from 85 to 80%. So nothing that's going to completely remove Annie from meta, but her time on top in the OP tier will be coming to an end, as we'll be demoting her down one tier into S. Kassadin will have power shifted around in his kit for this patch, with E gaining damage but R losing damage. On top of this, his base armor will be increased from 19 to 21. The E damage buff consists of the spell gaining 10 base damage at all ranks. R nerf is to the AP ratio, going from 10 to 7%. So pre-6 Kassadin is stronger, but when you reach the mid to late game and are team fighting, damage output will be lower. We're probably looking at Kassadin staying at a similar power level to where he was in 25.10, so he'll remain in the A tier for the time being. So for the mid lane tier list in 25.11, with Annie dropping out of the OP tier, we're going to be a little bit bold and move Xerath up into the OP tier. With Xerath already being the second highest win rate mage from 25.10, only behind Annie, he's going to overtake that #1 spot this patch due to Annie's nerfs and Horizon Focus getting buffed. Diana is also going to be moved up into the mid lane OP tier, as she's the best mid lane assassin that you can play right now for Diamond and below. The passive monster damage buff isn't completely useless for mid lane Diana either, because when helping your team take down grubs or dragons in the early game, the buff will come into play. One of the most underrated champions in the entire game right now, who got stronger last patch with the AP item changes, is Neeko. Neeko runs a 2-item core of Rocket Belt into Storm Surge, and both items were buffed, so she's been finding incredible success in her limited play. So if you like playing those strong but underrated champs that fly under the radar, Neeko is the pickup for 25.11. Ashe is going to be pushing down towers a bit faster moving forward, as her Q will now stack when attacking structures. It will be interesting to see how much win rate this buff actually adds to Ashe, because when we've seen these kind of buffs for top lane champs in the past, it's generally been a pretty small boost. For Ashe to even receive a buff in the first place is kind of odd, because by no means has she been struggling in recent patches. So with this change going through, we'll be bumping her up from A into S tier. Sivir is going to be getting a buff to her W bounce damage AD ratio, as it's being increased from 30 scaling to 50% to 40 scaling to 50%. So it's not that massive of a buff, considering that the value is still the same at max rank. However, you will be stronger than before up until level 13. Considering Sivir has actually been performing pretty well in recent patches, it's likely Riot's issuing this buff just to get players to pay more attention to Sivir and actually start picking her more. Sivir has been above a 50% win rate for a while now, so it's not like she's been a bad ADC. Buff likely isn't enough to move her into OP tier territory, but she's going to be one of the better S tier picks for sure. So Twitch is getting buffed for this patch, but if you're playing the standard AD Twitch, then it's of no impact to you, as it's the AP ratio on Twitch's E that's going up from 30 to 35%. We definitely can't see AP Twitch making a comeback because of this buff, so the champ should see no power shift at all for 25.11 and will remain in the ADC S tier. Lucian has been an OP tier ADC for multiple patches in a row, so this will be the first time in a while he drops out. It's Lucian's E cooldown that is being nerfed, as it will be increased by 2 seconds at rank 1. If you guys remember, it was actually Lucian's E cooldown getting buffed that turned him into an OP pick back in 25.6. So now that Riot is partially reverting that buff, he should still be a strong pickup, but just not OP tier worthy, as we'll be dropping him into S. Smolder joined the ADC S tier due to his buffs from 25.10, so Riot is looking to bring him back down in 25.11. It's Smolder's HP regen that is being lowered from 4.5 to 3.75, while armor is being reduced from 26 to 24. So honestly, we don't see these nerfs reducing Smolder's power by very much. At most, we could see a 1% drop in win rate, but even that would be a bit of a stretch. So for now, we will be keeping Smolder in the ADC S tier, but if the nerf is a bit more harsh, the furthest he would drop for the mid-patch tier list would be into A tier. Samira is going to be adjusted in a way that could lead to a shift in build priority for 25.10. Lifesteal effectiveness on Q is being increased from 66 to 80%. R lifesteal effectiveness is going up as well from 50 to 80%, and then W bonus AD ratio takes a hit, being reduced from 60 to 50%. So you're losing some damage in exchange for more sustain, which on paper seems like a good trade-off. Whether Samira gains power or stays rather neutral due to these changes is all going to come down to whether or not Bloodthirster Rush becomes more optimal than the Collector. In previous patches, the Collector has had about a 1% better win rate, but we wouldn't be surprised if that shifted into Bloodthirster's favor for 25.11. So we'll definitely keep you guys up to date if anything new pops up build-wise for Samira this patch, and for now, we're going to be leaving her in the ADC A tier. So now that Lucian has been nerfed, there's just going to be be two clear-cut OP tier champs, being Jinx and Tristana. With Smolder, Ashe, and Sivir recently gaining power, there's actually a lot of really strong ADCs who are in and around the same power level. In our 25.10 mid-patch update, we mentioned how we'd potentially be moving Senna back up the tier list if there's a new build that comes into meta on her and provides her with additional power, and that's exactly what has happened. So she's being placed back in the A tier. The build in question that has propelled Senna up in power consists of running static Shiv as a rush item. It's a very unique build that we don't see on any other ADC, with a Shiv rush into Black Cleaver second and Fire Cannon third. Shiv feels really nice on Senna because one of her weaknesses is her lack of being able to clear out waves quickly, so Shiv helps to alleviate that. Black Cleaver in general is just really nice on Senna because she stacks the passive super fast, and the durability it provides is incredibly valuable for a champ who is immobile and squishy. So if you're looking for a change of pace down in the bot lane and want a new ADC to try, Senna is a good choice for 25.10. Supports players definitely get the short end of the stick for 25.11, as there's literally not a single direct change to any support champion. Unless you count Twitch as a support, which I guess you could, as AP builds are what support Twitch runs, but even then, we don't see that AP ratio buff to Twitch's E, making support significantly stronger. Support Twitch has had a 41% win rate in 25.10, so a 5% boost to his E AP ratio is not all of a sudden going to bring that up multiple percentage points to get him into a viable spot. So the OP tier for support is going to remain the same, with Braum and Nami as the two most optimal champs in meta. The Horizon focus buffs will give a slight indirect boost to both Xerath and Vel'Koz. We have had support Xerath down in the B tier for a while now, so he will be getting a bump into A for 25.11. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it everyone, that's a complete look at the solo queue tier list for every role as we head into 25.11. Thank you all so much for watching, we'll see you in the next one.